Paris Agreement, formerly known as the Conference of Parties COP21, Protocol on Combating Climate Change, is the world's first comprehensive regime on tackling climate change within the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. While more than 90 nations committed to cutting down emissions and switching to clean energy at the Paris Climate Change Summit, the deal will have effect only when a minimum of 55 countries covering at least 55% of global emissions ratify it. United States and China jointly ratified the agreement. United States and China are responsible for 38% of global emissions, so their ratifying the agreement is a big boost to cutting down emissions globally. The decision by the United States to withdraw from the Paris Agreement on climate change is a major disappointment for global efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and promote global security. The Paris Agreement was adopted by all the world's nations in 2015 because they recognized the immense harm that climate change is already causing and the enormous opportunity that climate action presents. It offers a meaningful yet flexible framework by all countries. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres is confident that cities, states and businesses within the United States along with other countries will continue to demonstrate vision and leadership by working for the low-carbon, resilient economic growth that will create equality and quality jobs and markets for 21st century prosperity. He says it is crucial that the United States remains a leader on environmental issues and looks forward to engaging with the American government and all actors in the United States and around the world to build a sustainable future on which the future depends. On the flip side, former U.S. President Barack Obama has lamented the decision of his successor Donald Trump to withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Change Agreement, saying in a statement that the deal was intended to protect the world for future generations. President Donald Trump has announced that the United States will withdraw from the landmark Climate Change Pact. Other world leaders say there is no going back on the agreement, but President Donald Trump views it differently. The United States pulling out of the agreement might risk missing out on the economic benefits of being part of the Paris Agreement. That's the general opinion. My guest on Diplomatic Ties today is a career diplomat and former Permanent Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and a recipient of the Presidential Distinguished Public Service Award, His Excellency Ambassador Bulus Lolo. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Diplomatic Ties.
Thank you very much, Oden. Pleasure to be here again.
That precisely will be the focus on the program today, but we shall be taking a look at the comments Nigeria's position in COP22 in Marrakesh, Morocco, the UN Secretary General's position, Antonio Guterres, on canvassing the need for countries to be faithful and committed to the climate change deal, and a few comments by Donald Trump before the conversation continues. Stay with us.
Coming 1 year after the Paris climate deal and days since its entry into force, COP22, as this Marrakesh conference is called, is the crucial next step for governments to reinforce responsible collaboration as well as achieve a collective shift towards a new sustainable development model. In his statement, President Muhammadu Buhari expressed optimism that the conference will mark another milestone in the collective aspiration of the international community towards addressing the menace of climate change. He stated Nigeria's ambitious but achievable commitment to what he called green growth, in line with the platform of change on which his administration was elected.
This commitment comes from the recognition of the grave social, economic, and environmental threats that climate change poses to humanity. We believe that pursuing these programs will not only reduce emissions and improve climate resilience, but also stimulate growth and economic opportunities in the private sector. Our goal is to make Nigeria one of the world's best examples of how reducing emissions can benefit the environment and the economy.
The president used the forum to alert the international community that in Nigeria, the larger dimension of the challenge posed by climate change goes beyond emission rights to that of survival, warning that if nothing is done, the human and financial cost will be colossal. With Nigeria's instrument of ratification for the new global agenda on climate change already submitted, President Muhammadu Buhari called on world leaders to recommit themselves to the goals of the Paris Agreement for the benefit of this and future generations.
As president, I can put no other consideration before the well-being of American citizens. The Paris Climate Accord is simply the latest example of Washington entering into an agreement that disadvantages the United States to the exclusive benefit of other countries.
It is absolutely essential that the world implements the Paris Agreement and that we fulfill that duty with increased ambition. The science is beyond doubt. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has put it, and I quote, "Human influence on the climate system is clear. The more we disrupt our climate, the more we risk severe, pervasive, and irreversible impacts."
So, the intricacies involved in this whole thing.
Right.
Let's say you were very much at COP21 where this agreement was endorsed. Was it a big deal?
A very big one. In your opening, you called it almost a historic event. Until COP21, the world had not come together as one to sign on to any agreement on climate change. But COP21 stood in a league of its own, given that the facts had already shown the devastating effects of climate change. The world was in search and still in need of a new direction. And the warnings are very clear to all and sundry that unless we do something and do it fast, we are heading in the wrong direction. And that all the big players in the climate change politics came together and agreed in Paris. It was a major, major achievement of a proportion that words cannot describe. And indeed, there was a lot of expectation that after COP21, there will be a boost, as you said, to the campaign to halt the rapidly rising warming on the surface of the earth. So that was the significance of COP21.
Okay. Ban Ki-moon, immediate past UN Secretary General, sustained the campaign.
Right.
And one of the first steps Antonio Guterres, his successor, did is to sustain that, which we even have run on this program.
Right.
Now, a lot of persons thought with the follow-up Antonio Guterres did, the United States President, we know during the campaign days, he said he was not in agreement with the US signing the pact.
Right.
Now, he has said he will withdraw, but on a condition. So, are you saying the UN Secretary General's campaign, as it took over from Ban Ki-moon, was not sustained enough?
Not the question of the energy that was brought by the new Secretary General, no. It's not about even the Secretary General or the UN system. It's about global politics. And if you situate global politics in the context of American politics, you will see that the United States believes that it is the world and the world must succumb to the US, which is what informed the mantra of Donald Trump. He promised to make America great again. But what measure are you going to use in determining whether America is great again or not? We have moved away from the Cold War. We've moved away even from the period before the Cold War to a new era where there are so many players and so many issues on the table. Because if you are to take an area like the world economy, America is the largest debtor on earth, in excess of $17 trillion in debt. And whether they will pay that or not, we don't know, because it is not the present generation of Americans that will pay. It is not even the next generation after the present that will pay, but many generations yet to come that are already in debt. If that is the measure of greatness, then I don't know what greatness is about. But as to Donald Trump and his attitude, he campaigned, as you rightly pointed out, making the Paris Agreement as one of those emotive issues to win the support of his base, which is right of the Republican Party. And now that he won that campaign and the election against the popular will, because he didn't win he only won in the Electoral College, he lost the popular vote in the United States. He must be seen to deliver to that hardcore. So his decision to withdraw is more of an internal commitment than an act that reflects global reality.
Okay. Now, let's look at every decision has a consequence.
Sure.
Now, let's look at it from the perspective of consequence for the world and consequence for the U.S.
Right.
Let's look at consequence for the world now. Now, the Paris Agreement on climate change was the very first time after many years that the world came together and spoke in one voice. Now, what would be the likely consequence if UN sustains this position it is having?
First, it is like Hillary Clinton said, a historic mistake being made by the United States. Second,
If it withdraws.
already they've announced their withdrawal.
Okay.
They've announced their withdrawal. And you see the irony of it, and even sad aspect, was the fact that President Obama used executive fiat, or what they call in the United States executive order, to ratify the agreement. He didn't have to go through Congress because, one, there wasn't much time. Two, he was in his last days, and he felt that rather than expend his energy on this issue that would have been very, very contentious in Congress, he elected to go the easy way by issuing an executive order. It is also through an executive order that Donald Trump will withdraw the United States. But in my view, the greatest consequence of the withdrawal will
For
be
the world now.
for the world
Okay.
will be an inadvertent admission by the United States that the world lacks a global leader. That would be the greatest consequence. Second, if America is not committed to the Paris Agreement, and America is not bound legally by the Paris Agreement, then it means we are going to still have about 0.333% of the emission still coming uncontrolled. In your opening program, you said between China and the United States, they contribute about 38%
emissions. That's 8%.
emissions.
Yeah.
And there are 4 countries in total. If you add India and Brazil, these are the heavy emitters. Of course, you will add France, Britain, and other industrialized countries, but not of the scale today of Brazil, India, China, and the United States.
Okay.
With America withdrawing, it only means that activities will continue uncontrolled. There will not be a commitment to an enforceable law that otherwise would have held them accountable and liable.
Okay.
So that, in my view, would be the consequence for the rest of the world, that we are
Would
going
that bring
to
some
lose
kind
out.
of stalemate in implementing the Paris Agreement on climate change?
Not stalemate as such, but other countries may be reluctant to go the whole hog.
Okay.
They may be reluctant to go the whole hog.
Okay, so from your comment now,
Yeah.
from your knowledge, because you're knowledgeable in this area, will you say Nigeria should go the whole hog in this?
Well, we have met our national commitment, and part of it is voluntary, which is the nationally determined commitment that we made. We've announced a 20 or 25% and are looking to increase it over time to 45%. In doing so, I hope that our leaders have taken into account the reality today in Nigeria. China has signed the agreement and ratified, but China has given a commitment to start its count from 2030 because China wants to grow her economy to a level of comfort before committing to using more of renewable energy than reliance on fossil fuel.
So does it mean if they do that now, they'll be able to build the economy to the status they want?
That is the argument.
Okay.
That is the argument. And I hope too that we are listening and analyzing carefully.
Okay.
Because you see, there was a time, and indeed there is still that principle, except that it is in recession right now, drowned by the politics of today. But the whole concept of equal, there was this concept in Brazil that allows a country to recognize the contribution. States may be equal, but their responsibility is not the same. In climate change, developing countries are on the receiving end, and especially Africa. So if you look at your contribution to global warming, it is minute compared to what one country is doing. In fact, maybe the United States is polluting more than the entire continent put together. And I believe that for us in Nigeria, we must continue to use what we have in a responsible manner, such as we need clean technology to continue to exploit our fossil fuel. But we cannot afford to sacrifice fossil fuel today in Nigeria. Our economy is dependent on it. And number two, there are 3 pillars to achieve sustainable development. 1, you have the economic end of it. 2, you have the social. And then 3, you have the environmental. But we are silent about the economic and social pillars of the tripod that make up sustainable development.
Okay. Let's get to the consequence for you have given us the picture, the consequence for the world.
Right.
What would likely be the consequence for the United States?
Already you can see that top companies in America are agitating for America to remain in the in the Paris Agreement. This is because the truth about climate change cannot be denied. We may play politics with it, but it will not change the reality. Obama realized it, and Obama then took very, very drastic steps to enforce environmental controls in the United States by upping the percentage of renewable energy and weaning America off its dependence on fossil fuel.
Okay.
But now that the Republicans are in power and the Republicans control finance, the Republicans control the Congress, the Republicans are also controlling, though not necessarily the widespread media, but the vocal media of America.
Okay.
With those elements that they control, you see that they are coming up with a narrative that questions the reality of science.
All right. Africa as a continent,
Right.
which is under the umbrella of the African Union, the countries within Africa, Nigeria inclusive,
Right.
are very low emitters.
Correct.
So given the development now, what should Africa do?
We should remain committed. 1, we have small island states in Africa, Madagascar, Mauritius, and very close to us here we have Cape Verde that are on the coast. These countries are under real threat of submersion. And unless we stay the course to control global warming, with rising sea level around the world, one day we'll wake up and these countries will be no more. It's not fiction, it's reality. And even here in Nigeria, our coastal regions are at threat. If you see how much Lagos State has put in to control the the submersion of
Coastal erosion?
the coastal, yeah, okay, it's eaten so much land, and it's not going to be any long time before we see the devastating effects. In the northern part of our country, we see how much the Sahara Desert is encroaching, and rapidly so. So we are losing our farmlands, we are losing our coastal lines, and we're losing our way of life. Africa does not need any persuasion to remain committed to the Paris Agreement, but we should do so with our eyes and ears wide open to the global reality. The big guys are not in a hurry to help us, which is why even the fund that was established has not been funded fully. And if America withdraws, it will be a Herculean task to get them to commit any money to the global fund to support.
Can it possibly be funded without the U.S. contribution?
Why should it be without the U.S. contribution? There's no reason for that. Okay. If there is solidarity, then there has to be cooperation. Okay. And that should be the guiding principle.
Okay. Now, Nigeria has canvassed the position of Lake Chad. We heard Mr. President talk about it. Lake Chad, desertification. Now we have a lot of intervention programs within the country. I'm aware of the UN RED program. UN RED is fully called United Nations Reductions in Emission, Degradation, and Deforestation. We have the Great Green Wall project in Nigeria, and all these interventions are meant to be funded. If funding does not come, how do we combat arresting shrinking of Lake Chad and other challenges?
Let's take, no matter how small, but let us demonstrate a will and a commitment through a change of attitude. Let's do less harm to our forest cover. Burn less of the grass that we do annually. Cut down less wood that we use for cooking in our homes. And get companies that are drilling oil in Nigeria to burn less gas and rechannel these into environmental activities. Okay. And so I am advocating that with a change of attitude and greater awareness by Nigerians, we will, as a nation, take our preventive steps. But to wait until the world comes on the Lake Chad initiative that we talked about, the Green Wall initiative, all of these are going to require a huge sum of money. And don't forget, we are in a country with very competing needs and demands. At a time when government...
Looking at it from the flip side now, if, in conclusion, if continents, say Africa, Europe, Asia, name it, decide to toe the line of the U.S., okay, since U.S. says they will not endorse...
It is inconceivable,
Is
sir.
it possible...
Don't even go there.
Okay.
It's inconceivable.
But is it possible that with these developments, there could be some kind of frosty relationship among nations in the world?
Not frosty relationship on account of the U.S. withdrawal. But what I see is opportunism, in the sense that a country like China will step in the fore to lead. And if China assumes that leadership position, China is going to gain morally, China will gain economically, and China will also gain politically. Okay. Because
so as a career diplomat now,
yes, sir.
Moving on, the way forward, what would be your advice in all this to the U.S., to Africa, to Nigeria?
I'm not in a position to advise the U.S. because the U.S. doesn't need our advice, or my advice in particular. But what I see, and may hazard a guess, is that the Trump administration, especially after the midterm elections of 2018, will be forced to take a position of inaction, meaning they will just remain static at a point, will drum less and make much less noise on climate change and the Paris Agreement, because that will certainly be a campaign issue in 2018 and ultimately in 2020, when there will be the presidential elections in the United States. But as for us in Nigeria and Africa at large, all hope is not lost, because I believe that it's only the very first and early steps in a long race that we're on. What may happen now that the United States is indicating they want the world to negotiate? What if nobody negotiates with them? And I doubt if anyone will go begging them for a renegotiation. So the leadership that China may assume as a consequence of this could be to the advantage of the rest of the world, because Europe is fully committed, especially the EU. They have been the global champions of the need for action to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Africa, of course, we are building a consensus around that issue. Asia, neither here nor there, because you have India and Japan, who are also heavy emitters. But they too are willing to stay the course and remain within the context of the Paris Agreement.
Okay. It was nice talking with you, Excellency.
Thank you so much.
I've been talking with His Excellency Ambassador Bulus Lolo, former Permanent Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs in Nigeria. Well, he has said so that no matter what, there are no consequences to the fact that the withdrawal of the U.S. from the Paris Agreement on climate change will have anything to do with or jeopardize the relations among nations of the world. But everybody who has endorsed it, who has ratified it, should keep their eyes open.
Yeah.
That's it on Diplomatic Ties today. Thanks for being there, and on behalf of all of us, always be our guest on the program. Bye-bye.
Thank you.